Good afternoon, everyone. Let me take just a
You're
minute.
muted.
Am I on? Am I on
You're
now?
unmuted.
Now, are we ready to go? All
Yes.
right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me take just a minute to read this announcement. The Budget and Finance Committee meeting will limit access to in the meeting room due to current limitations on public gatherings. Accommodations have been made to ensure that the public is able to participate in the meeting. The public may participate in the following ways: watch the meeting on Franklin TV or the City of Franklin website. Watch the live stream through the City of Franklin Facebook and YouTube accounts. Call into the conference meeting, 615-550-8420. Callers will be unmuted and given an opportunity to ask questions during the meeting at specific times. Limited viewing will be available in the lobby of City Hall to watch the live video. The public may email questions prior to the start of the meeting to the recorder at franklintn.gov to be read aloud. City YouTube, youtube.com, user City of Franklin, or facebook.com, City of Franklin. City website is franklintn.gov, Franklin TV. Next item on the agenda is consideration of Resolution 2020-53. This is a resolution declaring that the Budget and Finance Committee shall meet on May 14, 2020, and conduct its essential business by electronic means rather than being required to gather a quorum of the members physically present in the same location, because it is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. I do need a motion.
Mr. Chairman, before you take this motion and vote, we'll need you to do a roll call of those members present.
I need to have a roll call for the members present. Alderman Bransford.
Present.
Alderman Speedy.
Present.
Alderman Peterson.
Present.
And the chair is present. Done mute. Okay. We have already read item number 1, which is a consideration of Resolution 2020-53. I'll entertain a motion for approval.
Second.
And a second. Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. Item 2 is consideration of approval of minutes for the March 15th, 2020 and April 9th, 2020 Budget and Finance Committee meetings. I'll entertain a motion to approve those 2 meeting minutes.
Move for approval.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 3, new business, consideration of Resolution 2020-64 for the City of Franklin Employee Pension Plan, providing a cost of living adjustment to the monthly benefit for retired recipients effective July 2020. Christine, I think you had some comments that you wanted to make.
Good afternoon. This item is something that we bring to this committee every spring. We do have a closed single employer City of Franklin pension plan in which the provisions for the cost of living increase for these retirees is established by the calculation of the March Consumer Price Index, excluding fuel and food compared to the March of the prior year. That calculation, which was calculated for 2020, is 2.09%. That is very similar to last year for 2019 of 2.04%. This calculation is brought in resolution to this committee. We request consideration by the full board, and then it is implemented with the checks or with the disbursements for July of 2020. We do know this is unusual times to be coming with a request to increase our pension payments. There is precedent for this. I'm actually back in the recession. This board did go ahead and do these increases even during the hard times of the 2008-2009 timeframe. This additional payment is made from assets of the pension system. We do not take funds that could be used for other purposes and use those for retirees and their monthly payments. We do have assets which are held in trust for us and for the purposes of making these pension payments. And with that, I would ask if the city administrator may have any additional comments.
Thank you, Christine. I'll just add just a little bit. I think you touched on it well. The distinction I would draw is, yes, this is something
we've done in the past. It's been our annual
process to do this on that same calculation each year. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And we have done this for many, many years. It is anticipated in the structure of the pension plan itself. And as Christine mentioned, it's something we did even in the challenging times of the recession, and is from pension resources. We're not pulling dollars from our general fund to make this allocation. It is within the pension fund itself, and those assumptions about these sorts of inflationary increases are incorporated when we set our contributions to this pension fund every year. So this is all part of what we do in terms of taking care of retirees, and feel that's appropriate to continue that even in these unusual times.
Any other comments or questions from any of the committee members?
I guess my one comment would be, it is unusual times. I guess we got a situation where current employees won't be receiving any COLA increases or merit-based pay, but I do understand this is kind of worked into how the pension fund exists, and more than likely we could probably be in a situation a year from now where the cost of living adjustment could be almost nil for retirees, and then we do have merit-based and COLA-based payments coming back for current employees.
Do we have any comments, Eric, from anyone from the public?
Any comments on the line from public regarding the pension cost of living adjustment?
Then I will entertain a motion to recommend this to the full board. Do I have a motion?
Move for approval to the full board, and so that we all have a say in this. The work session as well, full board, or just skip the work session and go to the board? Which one are you thinking?
Well, if it's unanimous at the committee, we typically put it on consent for the full board. We can follow whatever direction you like, but if there's a unanimous approval of the committee, we'd probably just put it on consent.
Make sure we guard ourselves against. Scott Speedy made a good comment, but I think it's very important for us to let the full board know, and any more comments. I guess it always could be pulled from the consent. Okay, just whatever. I just want to make sure that we get it out there in the public clearly, because we're going to be making one decision this way, maybe another decision another way. And I just want to make sure we are clear about that.
And we'll follow whatever your guidance is. I'm just telling you what our typical pattern is, and given the specific nature of this, if you'd like us to put it on both agendas or just put it on new business for the upcoming meeting, we could do that as well. Whatever just the general sense of the committee is, we'd be glad to do either way.
Yes, I would prefer the voted meeting at the regular meeting. Thank you.
I do have a motion. I have not received a second yet, I don't think.
Second.
Motion to second. Is there additional discussion on that?
I would agree with Pearl. I think just a new business, just to acknowledge it since it is a little unusual.
Will do.
We'll call vote. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Let's go to item 4, consideration of resolution 2020-68, a resolution to amend City of Franklin alternative payment policy. Christine, do you want to start that one out?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Typically we bring policy updates to this committee in June. We let you finish all of your budget work, and then we come in June and talk about policy updates. This is a little different. We are asking this committee to consider a policy update here in the month of May. And I want to give just a brief context, a little bit of background to this policy. And I think the timing of it will come in, will be understandable. We began a analysis probably almost a year ago that was led by Lawrence Sullivan, our revenue manager, along with Mike Lowe, our comptroller, to review the credit card policies of departments across the city. Certainly, most of our credit card usage are in the utility area, but we had many departments throughout the city who accepted credit cards via some different platforms for the ease of their customers as they were accepting payments. And so when with their leadership, there was an analysis done that showed that credit card procedures were handled differently throughout the city. And there is some good explanations for that. And certainly in the history of credit cards being accepted by governments and utilities, we had lots of different laws, both federal laws, state laws, as well as policies of the credit card companies that we had to evolve through. And the one that we were dealing with primarily here in the recent times has been that we had applied a $3.50 convenience fee for our utility customers who chose to pay by credit cards. And actually, before we went into the COVID-19 period, we had presented this analysis to our city administrator, Eric Stuckey, and we discussed with him a pathway moving forward. And he gave us direction that he would like us to have a consistent payment policy for the city. And that consistent policy would be with that the expenses for accepting credit card fees would be over time borne as expenses of the different areas in which we accept cards. And so over time, those expenses would be built into fees and charges. It takes a little time to do that, but certainly we're looking at expenses, total expenses of about $300,000 a year, which are primarily for the utilities, but not exclusively, that we anticipated in this route that we would begin actually coming to you in June, and for a policy that begins July 1st to have those expenses borne directly by the city and no longer charged as convenience fees to customers. However, we entered into the COVID period in the middle of March, knowing this was a direction that our city administrator had given us. We, as staff, went to our city administrator and asked for his consideration to implement that sooner, so that any customers who did not perhaps need to come into the building or for some reason would like to pay with the credit card and not have to have the additional $3.50 added on for what can be a pretty small bill would have that opportunity. And so I know our city administrator had updated the board a couple of times with that decision that he made back in the middle, toward the end of March, to begin implementing that. So I would like for you to hear some comments from Lawrence Sullivan, representing our staff committee who's been working on this project. But in essence, this is somewhat of a ratification because we implemented at the end of March for a way that our customers could have that as a payment option a little earlier than what we had anticipated bringing to you. Lawrence?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Christine. And also, Mike, thank you for your work significantly in this over the months that we've been looking at it. One of the things I don't think Christine mentioned was that we did absorb the fee for customers who paid in-house. So if they were here in line at the court, or if they walked into to us and talked to us at the desk, we could take their payments and the city would absorb the fee. But that was only about 15% of the payments. 85% of them, the customer was absorbing the fee. So most of this is new to us. It's the industry standard now we found that's different than years ago when we first implemented this policy. And it has been very well received by our customers. In the COVID-19 world, our foot traffic is way, 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 way down. We taught them to do things online or to do things through the mailbox, but we don't have people coming to the window much, even as we are open. We've been open here for a while. We were the last ones to close, maybe, and the first ones to reopen to new customers. So it's been very good. But we project that our current usage would be about a third of the cost that Christine has in the budget, and that the budgeted number does protect us for an up to a 30% customer usage in this area, plus the other areas that the credit cards would be well received to be used. So the budgeted number will cover us for what's an industry average that maybe 30% of our customers will choose to use a credit card going forward, rather than just 12% that we've had in the past.
Any other questions or comments? Then I would entertain a motion to forward this item to the full board for its consideration. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
Move for approval to the full board.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Chair, before we do that, let's just do a quick check for any public comment.
That's right.
I don't know that we have anybody on the line, but let me do a quick check. Any public comment on the phone line related to the convenience fee proposal? Nothing, Mr. Chair.
Roll call vote. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes, sir.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes. Go to item 5, presentation of the FY 2021 proposed annual operating and capital budget.
I need my sharing enabled.
And Mr. Stuckey, you're up.
Just a moment, I'll pull my screen up and we'll take you through a presentation of the proposed fiscal year 21 budget. Here we are. All right, I hope you all can see that. Thank you very much. It is a unique time to present a budget. It is a unique budget. But our team has worked hard to pull this together, and I think it is responsive to the times that we're in and to the information we have at this time. And I'll walk you through that. What we'll do first here, just a second, is give you just sort of a sense of what I'm going to talk about, the focus of our budget overall, an overview, walk through the general fund, the other funds, and then tie it all up. We didn't just reduce the budget, we did reduce the number of budget slides. It's about 14 slides fewer than it was a year ago. So it's important, but it is a little bit streamlined from what you may be used to. One of our key elements here that we've had in place in my time here is making sure that collectively we're looking at effective management of our operations, that we run our operations, our budget process, that we're delivering high quality services. That's a key pillar. that we're focused on high quality community development that is highly competitive, and that we have a strong financial base. We've tied into our AAA bond rating from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. That's a key function for us that has influenced significantly a number of policies that we have in place, and that we have good long-term planning and financial management as a foundation in everything we do. So as we look at it, an overview of what the budget is focused on this year is of course responding to community needs driven by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic downturn, that we're maintaining high quality services to the community, we're preserving capacity to respond to future needs, and that we're investing in planning for the future. A couple key points I want to highlight in particular. We present this budget with very limited information at this stage. Our primary revenue source is sales tax. We don't have our March sales tax numbers and won't for probably another week. And we won't have our April sales tax numbers probably till around the time that you're voting on your third and final reading on this budget. So there's limited information. We've made the best estimates we can with that, and that will be part of what we see here. We also know, we know that we don't know the depth and the length of this economic downturn and how it will play out. So we recognize that we're going to need to continue to be adaptable and resilient as we work through what comes our way. So let me start with a highlight of the key numbers associated with the budget. Our all funds budget has been reduced $18.1 million. That's a 10.5% reduction. So that all funds budget is now at $154.3 million in terms of what's proposed for you for fiscal 21. Similarly, the general fund is at $70.2 million. That's actually 10.2%. I have a little typo there, but that's an $8 million reduction compared to the fiscal 20 budget. So let me hit the highlights of the general fund budget overall. It is balanced, but it is balanced through the strategic use of your reserves. We plan to use about $2.8 million of our general fund reserves in fiscal 21 to help balance that budget and make it work for the year. The budget is fully compliant with your debt and fund reserve policies. And even though we do tap into those reserves to make this budget work, we are still significantly above the threshold established in your fund balance reserve policy. And that is a good thing. That provides us capacity to deal with what may come next. And if this is a longer duration in terms of economic slowdown, we can have capacity to deal with that as well. Essential service levels to the community are maintained. That's critical. We're continuing to serve and plan to continue to serve our community and maintain high quality of life and serve our community well. The budget does have significant reductions in it, but there are no layoffs of staff, and key staff members are all kept in place. We do not have salary increases factored into this budget. Neither market nor merit increases are incorporated in this budget at this time. Now, the other element of that is the city is also proposing that it fully absorb the cost increases associated with our benefits costs or benefit premiums that employees pay. So we would keep employees essentially whole, keep them where they are today in terms of their contribution, especially to health insurance, and that the city would absorb that component. We maintain our low property tax rate, so there's no tax increase in this budget. There are no fee increases in this budget, with the exception of the planned rate increases in water and sewer that are just at 2.9% in water and 3% in sewer. That's reflected in this next to last budget. And then the final point is one I touched on a little bit earlier, but that is we really need to think of this budget as a budget in phases. We will very likely return to this budget in the fall as we know more, as we get more of those sales tax numbers, we get a sense of the trend and the outlook of what is coming our way through the balance of the year. And we'll likely need to adjust the budget again at that time. So just know that that is coming and that we will continue to assess that, and we'll be returning to make the appropriate adjustments in our budget, both to meet service needs, but also respond to our financial reality. Let me walk through some key components of the general fund. Looking at our revenue, where the money comes from, again, sales tax drives it, is by far our largest component. But I will point out to you, a year ago when we did this budget, that sales tax projection was somewhere around 51%. In this budget, because of the declines that we're projecting, it's at just 47.1%. State shared tax, which is also really related to consumption, related to state collections of sales tax at that level, and then brought back to cities on a per capita basis, is at 15% of our total. And that also shows decline from a year ago. And property tax is just shy of 12%. Then the balance of it, you see, are various fees, permitting, revenue, different franchise fees, et cetera, interest income make up the balance of that revenue picture. So when you look at it by source, again, this is a slide, a graphic we've showed you for the last several years. The consumption-based nature of our revenue sources remains highly focused on these sales tax and consumption-related taxes. But that number has declined significantly again due to the reduction in those revenue sources. So last year, that if looking at the same chart, it probably would have been almost 75%. I believe it's 74%. And now it's down to 68% in that consumption realm because of the decline we are projecting coming forward. So when we look at where we spend it, first of all, by functional area, public safety is at about half of that component. The administrative and economic development components are pretty stable, around 10 to 13% you see in those areas, and public works just around 17%. When you look at the expenditure by category, again, personnel really drives it. Our wages and benefits compose about 77% of our general fund. So when you look at that, that is a significant amount. It's actually up a little bit. I think that's reflective of what you see in the budget, where while we've limited spending in the personnel area, it still drives a lot of what we do. It's how we deliver our services through our personnel. And in public safety in particular, that number is above 80% in terms of the personnel related costs. So this next chart shows you our track record in terms of revenue versus expenditures. And you see up until this year, fiscal 20 and into 21, that had been a very steady growth in terms of us really controlling expenditures and being able to contribute really consistently every year to that fund balance. The reality is that will decline significantly. There are planned use of fund balance that was built into the fiscal 20 budget, about $7 million there, and those tied to two primary uses. One, for some refunding of debt. We restructured and used some cash to help us do that restructuring, use some general fund cash to do that. And then there are some projects that we had a specific plan to use some of our reserves to help with funding projects and reduce our need to go to bond funding for capital investment projects. So that was already baked in. But to also meet the needs of our community and to make our budget work for the balance of 20, we're going to tap about another $5 million of reserves to help carry us through. And that's still a budget that is over $4 million less than under budget when you compare what we estimate what we're going to spend, somewhere around $73 million, compared to a budget that was close to $78 million when we looked at it a year ago. So we're still significantly below budget, but with the revenue shortfalls we project for the balance of the year, we're going to need to draw on reserves close to $5 million, we think, through the balance of fiscal 20. And then there's a planned use of reserves in fiscal 21 of $2.8 million. That's significant, but we still have, and we've maintained a significant capacity in that reserve to help us continue on. That just under $38 million that you see projected at the end of fiscal 21 is still well in excess of your fund balance policy. It's just under 54% compared to your budget. So you still got capacity, and you're at a level that was pretty consistent in terms of the dollar amount of where you were in July of 2016. So we've made pretty good progress in terms of how that has moved forward. in terms of the building up of those reserves. And that's exactly why you do this, so that you can absorb these kind of blows when economic downturns take place. And as a community that is heavily dependent on sales tax revenue to fund our local government, this reserve is a significant, important protection. So then you see our revenue breakdown overall. You see significant negative numbers at the top of that chart. Our primary revenue sources all are taking significant reductions, both in local sales tax and shared sales tax. You see growth in the property tax, and that's reflective of new properties that came on over the past year onto the property tax rolls, and also the fact that we have added no new debt in the last fiscal year. So our debt service remains stable. So all of the new revenue coming in from property tax could go right to general fund operations. Let me take a look then specifically at sales tax. You see that a decline of 11% year over year, budget to budget. That number will be just around 33 million as we project it. And you'll see significant declines early in the 12-month period, and then see it gradually climb back up. There is a unique feature in this budget. It is that we will recover some additional sales tax at the back end of the year. The last 3 months of the fiscal year, April through June, the city will see its portion of the voter approved additional half-cent of sales tax that went into place in 2018. You may remember the city pledged for 3 years to give its half of that property tax or additional sales tax, to local school districts. And we have done that, and that 3 years will expire in April of 21, meaning beginning of that month, we will receive the typical division of local option sales tax, which is the city in which it is generated receives 50%, and then public schools receive the other 50%. And we'll go back to that typical division starting in April of 21. Again, property tax, but local sales tax accounts for 47% of the general fund. That's a significant reduction from a year ago. Let's look at the comparison to property tax and sales tax. We take a look at this frequently. And again, you see those two bars closer than they've been in really any recent memory. And that's reflective of a reduction of $4 million in local sales tax generated, and a good decent growth in property tax overall. So you see those. There have been previous years where that's almost a 2-to-1 ratio, and you see those fairly close to one another, given the decline that we're projecting in sales tax. So let's look at some other key elements of your general fund revenues. Intergovernmental revenue again declines 15%. Based on what we're projecting losses in sales tax at the state level, which will spin into what local governments receive. Property tax, we see a growth there of around 8%, and that's healthy due to the items I just talked about, the additional new development that has come onto the tax rolls over the last 12 months. Alcohol tax, another consumption tax there, a very slight decrease there in fiscal 21. And then we're projecting around a 7% decrease in our building permit area and modest increases in franchise fees. Other income areas are fairly stable. We do see those some pretty significant decreases in interest income and what's projected in municipal court revenue. So this is just another summary of the fund balance and where we are. This breaks it down a little more directly. We moved from beginning the fiscal year at about 53 million. We utilize 7 million as planned in the budget, and then an additional 5.3 million we think is going to be necessary to close out fiscal 20, and that puts us at 40.5 million entering the new fiscal year. And then again, we're projecting just under 2.8 million will be necessary to balance this budget, which takes us to just about $37.8 million. Around 54% of your budget in your reserves, and your policy again is 33%. So you're still significantly above your policy level. Let's turn to expenditures. This is a summary of the expenditures by departmental grouping. And you see our different areas there: public safety, finance administration, community economic development, public works. You also see the division in terms of our broader categories: the personnel, operating expenses, and capital equipment. Pretty much across the board reductions as we're trimming this budget down heading into the new fiscal year. Let's talk about the key personnel expense elements. Again, there is no pay adjustments in this budget, neither market nor cost of living. And then that is something we'll continue to keep an eye on. I would say, we'll take a look at mid-year when we know a little more. But I don't have an expectation that this is something we're going to be able to do in the fiscal year. Just to be as straightforward with you as I can. We'll see. We'll continue to look at it and see how things work through the balance of the year and around mid-year, see if there is anything that can be done. But I don't expect that to be the case, just given the way it looks at this point. We have, and early on, 2 months ago, we really implemented, for the most part, a hiring freeze. There's very limited ability to fill vacant positions at this point. Any of those are driven by specific decisions I'm involved in terms of approving any vacancies. And as you see already, just in 2 months, we've identified 38 positions across the organization, 27 full-time, 11 part-time positions that are authorized positions that we're holding unfunded in the new budget. As I indicated before, we do want to propose that we go ahead and hold employee contributions at the current level in this budget. That would move us a little bit towards a little higher contribution from the city. As you remember, like single coverage, the city pays 85%, the employee pays 15%. On family coverage, the city pays 80%, and the employee pays 20%. What we would do is essentially probably shift that up roughly around 1% each on the city side, meaning 86 and 81% for this year. And that is a change I would recommend just for this year. I think we'd have to revisit that a year from now and see where we're at. I think it is healthy to have a consistent cost sharing arrangement with our team members in terms of what they pay and what the city pays. And so that we're sharing in any cost adjustments that happen there. We are continuing to offer the high deductible plan with a health savings account associated with it. This will be the third year that's available to our team members. And so open enrollment starts here in a week. And that is another option that folks can look at to help them manage those health insurance costs. There is only one new position in this budget, and it is actually a position that saves us money. By hiring a data center technician, we are able to eliminate a contract and save ourselves about $7,000 in the general fund. So that is the only new position in the entire budget. Our department submitted over $17 million of program enhancements in the original budget. Of course, they did that pre-COVID-19, pre-pandemic, pre-economic downturn. And there's really only a handful of enhancements that are able to be added. This is the only position. There are a couple equipment replacement needs that are just beyond repair in terms of two vehicles and sanitation, and then some equipment for our police officers that need to be replaced. We are fully meeting our pension obligations, and this budget, like the budgets we've had for at least over a decade, we do factor in a vacancy assumption, meaning there is some turnover in positions, and there is some natural savings that occur in the budget when we have some turnover in positions, and especially since we're in a posture where we're likely to hold any vacancies that come available. This does help us stretch some dollars through the budget and is a good planning component. Just a quick focus on the pension contribution, a little over $5 million, about $5.2 million, and overall pension contribution is incorporated in the budget. That's an 8.7% increase. TCRS, that has grown slightly in terms of its percentage contribution, just over 6% there. And in total, our pension is about 12.8% of total payroll goes towards pension obligations. All right, when you look at outside appropriations, this is something we take a look at. We ask and did implement in this budget that there's a 10% reduction for all outside agencies that receive city appropriations, with two exceptions. One being the existing contract with the Williamson County Animal Control Center. Those services are under contract, and there's a very modest inflationary increase built into that existing contract. And it's our judgment that that is appropriate to live with that contract, continue on. That's a good value for our community and a good partnership with the county. And the other component is the funding is flat in the regional commuter bus support that the city provides in partnership with Williamson County, the Davidson County, and Spring Hill. Again, this is just a summary. This is a good almost table of contents for you that gives you places in the budget document to go to look at individual funds and those information related to those funds. I'll walk through the next handful of slides, just give you some highlights of some of those other funds, the non-general fund components of our budget. This gives you the dollar breakout of our all funds and our general fund in terms of personnel, operations, and capital. And you see, as we look at overall all funds, it is a little more balanced between personnel and operations. The bulk of our personnel is in our general fund. Just a couple things to highlight for you. The stormwater fund is budgeted at just under $4 million. We had originally planned to look at maybe restructuring that fund. The fee structure in that fund has not been addressed since it was created 16 years ago. We're going to hold off on that in this budget. We will probably return to that in another year or so and look at those options, but we're going to hold that as is. There's enough capacity in that fund to continue to fund operating components. And there are a couple projects that are planned from that fund, and we have enough capacity in that fund to continue everything moving forward that had been anticipated there. Sanitation also does not have a fee increase associated with it, and it does not have, for the third consecutive budget, any kind of general fund subsidy in place in that fund. So that's good. There are two pieces of equipment that will need to be replaced. There's a side loader and a mini packer that just are beyond being cost effective to try to repair them. So we do want to get those two pieces of equipment replaced. But the budget overall is an 11% reduction, just under $10 million. Hotel motel, obviously a major decline there in revenue, over 50% for fiscal 21 compared to fiscal 20, and the balance of the original fiscal 20. The balance of fiscal 20 from March on, we've reduced that over 50% as well. The overall expenditures in that budget are just at $3.8 million. We're meeting our debt service obligations, and there are a couple capital projects that had specific funding commitments in them that are, again, continue to be met in hotel motel. We are utilizing some of our fund balance to meet those obligations, but still have a healthy fund balance moving beyond fiscal 21. Across the board in our development funds, you'll see 50% reductions in our revenue projections compared to the previous budget. And that includes our road impact, our parkland dedication fund, our facilities tax, both on the city and county level. But we do continue to meet our funding obligations for debt service in areas like road impact and our other project commitments in parkland and the facilities tax components. Things like Fire Station 7, which is under construction now, will be those costs will run over into fiscal 21, and we'll make sure we cover those, and the budget anticipates that. In water and wastewater, it's a $35 million budget collectively. That breaks out into about 13.6 in water, 20.7 in sewer, and then $750,000, just under $750,000 in reclaimed water expenses. Again, we recommend that the board move forward with enacting year 3 of the rate structure. And what we've done the past several years is adopt 2 years of rates at a time. Year 3 and year 4 in that plan are projected the same 2.9% increase in water and 3% in wastewater. We do have over $100 million in 2 different state revolving loan funds that we submitted that rate structure as support for those loans, and those are loans that are highly favorable to the city. We project that we save over $30 million in interest costs in the life of those loans compared to if we'd had to go to the typical bond market on a utility revenue bond. So that's a positive for us to keep that in place and continue to support that. And obviously we're at a fairly early stage in that life of that loan, and we need to make sure we're maintaining our obligations there and keeping our rate structure in place that meets those debt obligations. So just at the end, to just summarize where we are in unprecedented times. We've never seen anything quite like this, with the limitations that the pandemic has put on our daily lives, but also our economic lives, and the downturn that has resulted. But the city is stepping up. It has stepped up throughout this crisis and will continue to do so. We're maintaining our services. This budget provides for that. We do need to strategically make use of our reserves. Again, that's exactly why you built the reserves that you built. And then we move forward by still preserving capacity. We talked about how, while we've used some of our reserves, we still have capacity there to deal with what may come in the future. And we're going to have to continue to be nimble and adapt to what may come our way in terms of the demands on the city, in terms of services, and what we need to do in terms of financial needs. Finally, we will continue to provide capacity to support high priority capital projects. We'll be having further discussion on that at your next board work session about where we are and how we move high priority projects forward and what our approach is across all of your capital investment projects and that whole plan. And, we stand ready to continue to serve and serve well. I want to thank our team for their resilience in working through a budget that is very different than what we planned at the beginning. Our departments have all stepped up and been a part of the solution. I want to thank our finance team, Christine, Michael, Mike, everybody, for what they've done to help us get there. And again, we've had leadership at every level in building this budget. And I'm deeply appreciative of what people have done to help us reduce a budget in a matter of really a few weeks by over $18 million. That's no small task. And do it in a way that we think continues to serve the community well, and be a budget that we can be comfortable with sharing with our citizens, that maintains a manageable tax burden on them, puts really no tax increases on our citizens, and keeps us moving forward with a high level of service to them. So I'm glad to present this to you, glad to answer any questions you may have as we move forward. And again, this is the first of what will probably be a multi-phase budget as we work through and adapt to what comes our way in the next year. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board.
Let me go down the list. Alderman Bransford, do you have any questions?
No question. I'm just also would like to thank the city administrator and the staff that put this together and brought it to us. We are very fortunate to be nimble in our system, to be accommodate these changing times, and I applaud the great work that all of you all are doing to make us proud. So no questions, no other questions.
Alderman Peterson, do you have any questions?
I don't see her on there.
Alderman Peterson, I may have lost you, have I? Let's go to Alderman Speedy then. Have you got any questions?
Similar sentiments as Alderman Bransford. My only question is, I know it looks like property tax is increasing. In the last recession, did we run into maybe a dip in collections on property tax, 3-5%, anything like that?
We really didn't. We'd have to look at the exact numbers, but it remained very stable, and the payment was very good, very consistent in terms of, we have a very low level of uncollected, and of course that stays associated with that property. We ultimately do get those collections, but it stayed well in the mid to upper 90s in terms of our collection at the time of the due date of property taxes throughout the recession. I'm going from memory, but we can double check that for you. But it really stayed pretty stable. We did not see maybe as much growth as we might have expected at reappraisal, which was around 2011, if I remember right. It was fairly stable then, too. They didn't see a huge growth level. And we saw significantly higher growth in that overall tax roll when reappraisal happened in 2016. So that's just, I'm kind of going from memory, but that's one of the things about property tax overall. It tends to be a much more stable revenue source, and it takes a much longer period of time for an economic downturn to ripple through it, if it ever does. And in fact, in the recession, we maybe saw a slowdown in the growth of the valuation, but we never saw a dip.
Alderman Peterson, do you have any specific questions?
No, not really. You know, it's just is what it is, I guess.
Let me ask, and just to follow, we did the reserves several years ago as far as the policy was concerned, and we did 33% of reserves for the daily operations for our yearly budget, right? So if we're at 30 at the end of this thing, we're projected to be at 33 million.
We're at 38 million
now,
and that we're projected at the end of fiscal 21 to be at just under 38 million, which is close to 54% of your budget. So it is still 21% above the threshold of your policy.
Because I'm hoping for the best and considering the possibility of something less. I mean, we're not quickly getting out of the situation that we're in, because I'd be surprised that sales tax bounces back within months and months and months. And so I want to make sure that we are not getting into a situation next year where we would be $3 or $4 million short and they need to go to reserves and not have it in reserve for next year. Because I think, this is completely different from the recession we went through and the sales tax and the property tax. And I think you're right, Eric. I don't remember seeing a dip in property tax collections. We did see a dip in building, but we did not see a dip in the percentage of property taxes that were due to be collected. We collected a pretty high percentage of those. So I would just encourage us to continue to look at this. I think this is a very difficult time to be going through, especially for the budgets, and not just for Franklin, for Williamson County, for state of Tennessee. Let me ask, has anybody seen what this has done to our Tennessee Consolidated Retirement accounts or any of those? Have you seen anything on those things? Then I'll ask Christine, do you want to, and I don't want to put you on the spot. You haven't, you just haven't.
Well, pensions are typically viewed on a point in time. Both our own closed pension is a 12/31 point in time, and then actually Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System goes back to June 30th. They're actually a fiscal year based system. So certainly we have sufficient assets both in our open plan and our closed plan. But certainly it's interesting as we follow the stock market and that the 30 we were down maybe 30%, and then we've made significant gains really before data is coming in. So it's going to be a ride for following our pension assets until we have the point in time of 630 for the TCRS and then 1231 for our much larger closed City of Franklin plan.
May I say something? As a longtime member of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System, I remember over many decades looking to see how it was being handled. And as I understand it, the state of Tennessee retirement and pension is one of the best in the nation.
It's consistently regarded as one of the top 5 state pensions in the country. And that's been my whole career, that TCRS has been viewed in been mentioned in the top 5. So it's definitely their asset portfolio is handled a little more conservative than some pension programs to help in these types of environments.
So let me just touch on the reserve component that you talked about. I want to give a little context to that. If your policy is 33% versus a budget now that is around 70 million, that would say that 33% threshold is between 21 and 22 million dollars. We're projecting at the end of this next year, so July of 2021, that you'll be just shy of 38 million. So that gives you above policy about $16 million. We only plan to use 2.8 million in this year. So you've still got yourself a pretty significant amount above your policy to absorb more blows that may come your way in terms of economic difficulty, or if this extends for a longer period of time in terms of downturn. So that's what we really tried to balance, and we'll continue to balance as we look at, really, like I said, future phases or updates of this budget. We're going to be guarding closely those reserves, but we also know that we may need to rely on them again to get through this. And so we're going to use those very judiciously, very prudently. But you see, we certainly didn't spend all of it here. We have tried to be very careful in what we're using and tried to structure the budget in such a way that there's still a good amount of capacity to help us deal with what may come next. Because I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be a quick recovery. The recession is painful, but it was painful, but there's a lot of indications that this could be more painful. It's certainly different. So there's a lot we don't know, and we recognize that.
I have a question.
Alderman Martin.
I know that this is not a good time to talk about a tax increase, but as soon as we get finished with this, I really think we ought to look at least a small tax increase, property tax increase, because we're still saying we are at the low end of other cities. And this proves that we cannot rely on sales tax forever. As long as things are great, that's wonderful. But this has proven that things aren't always going to be great. And I know we have some reserves, but we sure don't want to get down to the nitty gritty of the bottom of the reserves. So I would like for us to put that on the middle burner, not the back burner, but maybe the middle burner, to think about talking about a small tax increase with.
Let me ask, good comment. Let me ask you, do you have any comments from the public?
Do you have any comments on the line related to the proposed fiscal 21 budget? Nothing, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments from any other committee member, any other alderman, any person in the audience? Seeing as this was a presentation, no motion is necessary. When will you make this presentation to the full board? At the next workshop?
So we would bring this forward. We would like you to recommend the next couple items, which is item 6 is the adoption of the budget, and item 7 is establishing your property tax rate. So we'd like the committee to vote on those, and based on those votes, we would probably move it forward for first reading at the May 26th board meeting, and then second reading and public hearing at June 9th, and then third and final vote on June 23rd would be how this would lay out. So based on your vote on items 6 and 7, we would likely put it there, and I would do a brief version of this for the board overall, and especially at the public hearing.
And my other comment to that, which I think we can do, when we review the capital improvements projects, And I would assume that possibly because of this, some of the ones that's down on the list will be pushed out. I would like to know what funding for those capital improvements projects are in this. And by that, I mean any studies that we're doing, anything, any request for proposals or anything that's coming out that's in the budget here that would drive some of the capital improvements projects that we're looking at. Because I know we've got some Franklin Road, we certainly, that's there. I mean, we're going to do that. I'm sure that there's some others there also that we're looking at too. The sidewalk on Highway 96, the trail on Highway 96 West, some of those things like that. We know they're there. We know we're going to do them, but there may be something in there that we could look at, and it may not be necessary that we necessarily fund a study this year when a 6-month delay in a study might be appropriate to help out some on the budget that we've got in here. So those are some of the things that I would say about the budget. Any other questions or comments before we close on this item?
Mr. Chairman, a comment on that would be something like the money that we were putting forward about the proposal for a new city hall. Something like that. Where's that in here?
Well, that's part of what you're going to help us address when we talk on May 26th at the work session. What we've tried to look at is projects that were identified as high priority projects and where those would go. And you'll see a mix of projects that are going to move forward, some of which, like, for example, Franklin Road, we've taken bids and we've already sold bonds on it. And we got a very favorable bid on it too. So there's certain projects you're going to need to do and that you may be able to get a fairly good opportunity to get those done in a more competitive bid environment. There'll be others that you may take to design and then make a decision about whether you move forward. And there may be others that are lower priorities that you may decide to defer for a period of time. So that we'll walk through that with you and kind of there's, as you know, with capital projects, there's these natural stages, and there's certain ones that may make sense to take to a stage and then make a decision about where we are and what we move forward with. And we'll give you an overview of kind of what the staff perspective is, and you can give us some feedback and guidance from that discussion. And from there, there is a number of projects that have been commitments to that are incorporated in this budget, but there are some of that we need that direction, and then that'll be part of what we move forward with based on your guidance.
Thank you, Alderman Peterson. No other comments? Mayor, do you have any comment?
Yes. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. I would make a comment that it's important to consider where we are with many of these capital projects. I would agree with that. But we can't freeze in the spot we're at now during this pandemic. We need to continue to move forward as best we can. We've borrowed significant amount of money. For example, we've already borrowed the money, I think, for Franklin Road. And so that money is there. So we've done a lot of financial planning, how we're going to move many of these projects forward. So thanks for the opportunity to say a word.
If there are no other comments, let's go to item 6 on the agenda. And that is consideration of ordinance 2020-14, an ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, adopting a budget for the fiscal year 2020-2021, providing an effective date.
So, Mr. Chair, this is essentially the appropriation we just talked about that provides for the budget I just presented, which is an all funds budget of $154.3 million, and it included in that a general fund budget of $70.2 million.
Let me proceed this way. I'll entertain a motion and then discussion on this particular item. Do I have a motion for approval to forward this to the full committee, to the full board?
So moved.
Proper
Second.
motion, second. Do a roll call vote. Alderman Branford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Lost you on the screen. Chair votes aye. Did you understand the motion in the second? Got it? Okay.
I want to do a quick check for any public comment. Do a quick public comment check.
I'm ready if you are.
Okay. Do you have any citizen comment on the line related to the proposed fiscal 21 budget? Nothing, Mr. Chair.
All right. Let's move then to item 7. Consideration of ordinance 2020-15, an ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, establishing the municipal property tax levy or fiscal 2020-2021, providing an effective date. I may let the mayor cover the next 2020 and 2021 and all of that when we get to it. But anyway, we have a motion for municipal tax levy. You lost my, and I'm still circled in yellow. Let's go ahead and do a motion and then we'll do the discussion and see if there's any discussion on the property tax rate. Do I have a motion? And the motion would be to send this to the full board.
I move that we recommend it to the full board.
Proper motion or a second?
I second the motion.
All right, let's do a roll call vote on that.
Wait.
All
Wait,
the-
are we gonna have any discussion?
Yeah, we can do, yeah. Let's do the discussion on that if you want to do the discussion on that.
And also to see if there's any public comment too. Okay. The only thing I was going to say is if you look at the general fund on the property tax, is the debt service is half of the property tax. Anyway, basically.
Any other questions or comments? All right.
If you'd like, I can go and ask if there's any public comment on the proposed property tax rate.
I'm ready for that question.
Any public comment related to the proposed property tax rate for fiscal 21? Nothing, Mr. Chair.
All right. Let's go to a roll call vote. Alderman Branford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. Keep my finger on that. Let's go to item 8, consideration of resolution 2020-70. A resolution of the Board of Mayor and Alderman for the City of Franklin adopting the estimate of revenue and expenses for the water and sanitary sewer utility fund for fiscal year 2020-2021 and providing an effective date.
Mr. Chair, I'll just comment real quickly if you'd like. This is essentially adopting the water utility budget for water, wastewater, and reclaimed water. It's all one fund, and it is as a separate utility, you adopt its budget through this mechanism. It's just a little different than what you do for your overall other governmental funds. So this resolution establishes that budget for water and sewer.
Forward Resolution 2020-70 to the full board. Do I have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Proper motion and a second. Do we have anyone on the phone that wishes to address that?
Any callers on the line related to public comment related to the proposed water and sewer budget? Nothing?
Any comments or from any of the committee? Any comments from anyone else in the auditorium? Okay, then let's go to roll call vote. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. That motion will be forwarded to the full board. Let's go to ordinance item 9, consideration of ordinance 2020-13, an ordinance to amend the budget of the city of Franklin for fiscal year 2019-2020. Sponsors, Mr. Stuckey and Mr. Young. One of you are up.
I'll hand it off to Michael. This is
Okay.
We're gearing up for the closeout of the fiscal year, and we've got to do that through this amendment. So we have to make a number of projections and provide some capacity to make sure our budget stays whole through the balance of the fiscal year. And Michael has worked with our departments to make those determinations. So Michael, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Michael Walters-Young, Budget and Strategic Innovation Manager. Ordinance 2020-13 is a sort of catch-all budget amendment to finish finding a way to make this amazing fiscal year somehow end in balance for our funds. State law requires that we must have funds and cash positions that are appropriately balanced with at least 1 month's worth of expenditures accounted for before we close the fiscal year, and that they must be done that way effective June 30th, which means we have to work earlier and bring this to you in your May meeting so that we meet our 3 reading ordinance requirements for legal approval. There's a lot of moving pieces in this ordinance, but it really boils down to simply 2 amendments. The first is year-end cleanups, and the second is year-end contingencies. Within the general fund, there are 3 changes to revenues. There's a recognition of $760,000 additional dollars in grants, primarily from the U.S. Department of Interior for parks, land acquisitions and parks projects. We were served as a pass-through agency for a contribution for the Spivey Tract. And so that's the lion's share of this amount, with expenses recorded within the Parks Department. So you'll see an amount further on in this memo regarding that. And then the other aspect of this, the lion's share of the revenue changes, and really the formal accounting mechanism to try to account for the economic downturn, is an allocation from fund balance, which Eric spoke of. We estimate we're going to need about $5.3 million, but we have written the ordinance to say not to exceed $10 million, and a contingent revenue loss recognition of slightly more than $10 million. And that's in order to keep the amendment in balance with all of the moving pieces and all of the ins and outs. The not to exceed amount is very critical because it allows us to transfer only the amount that is absolutely necessary to keep that general fund at a balanced amount so that revenues will meet expenditures. If revenues are exceedingly better, then certainly we won't have to transfer nearly as much of the $5 million that we anticipate. But if they are worse, we have a legal requirement on behalf of the state of Tennessee that we must finish the general fund in balance. And so this mechanism allows the comptroller in order to do that and comply with state law. From the expense side of things, there are several aspects. The first is a reduction in expense of $1.6 million. Eric alluded to working with staff, and they very feverishly, at our request, had a very lengthy period of about 4 or 5 days with which they could come up with budget recommendations that they thought they could handle for the remainder of the fiscal year. They did the same for fiscal 21, and all told, they came up with over $1.66 million of current year reductions that they could be able to handle. We have taken those literally away now and via this amendment from their budget to ensure that we can use less fund balance at the end of the year and keep as much cash on hand as possible. There is a series of supplemental appropriations, which total just north of $1.15 million. And there are 5 departments which need them. In administration, the movement of the agenda management software and simply the timing of when that occurred in fiscal 2020 required some supplemental monies, as well as the fact that there was no vacancy adjustment recognized within the administration department because it was fully staffed through the year. The largest amount comes from the fire department. It's $500,000 for unbudgeted or added personnel costs. The original amount of money, nearly $225,000 for paramedic pay stipends, was simply not budgeted in fiscal 20. Sorry about that. But this allows us, we've been paying it, of course, as paramedics have earned it, but we didn't properly budget it for the beginning of 2020. Rest assured, it is budgeted appropriately for 2021. We also have additional paramedic pay that was put forward and approved by you to make the paramedics more competitive. And this amount that you see there, the roughly $35,000, is what's necessary to cover just the amount since April 5th through the remainder of the fiscal year. There were retirement payouts of nearly $170,000 as firefighters retired. They are, of course, owed various forms of accrued leave. We do not budget this amount within individual departments. We budget it separately, and if there's overage needed, or there's a need to cover this overage, I should say, then we transfer it from general expenses. And then finally, vacancy adjustments. Again, the Franklin Fire Department was better staffed and had fewer vacancies. So we put in a 3.5% vacancy adjustment within every department, as Eric mentioned, as a budgeting tool. They will not be able to receive that amount of vacancy adjustment. So this amount covers the remainder to make sure that the fire department remains in balance. The Parks Department, I already mentioned, the lion's share of this amount is the pass-through for the Spivey Tract acquisition. In appropriations to outside agencies, there's 2 minor increases, which were not originally budgeted regarding 2 outside agencies that we need to make sure that we meet our contract obligations with them. And then finally, 1 transfer to cover the balance of a capital project, which you approved in your CIP and funded originally out of the general fund. And that was for the Maplewood Stormwater Project. Came in about $59,000 higher than the original budget. This is a good moment to take a step back. In the discussion of capital projects, you'll see that there's 4 or 5 different capital projects which have slight increases within this budget. The reason why there are very few capital projects that we touched base on is not only will we need your guidance as to what to move on in the future, but you already moved significant sums of money, well over $10 million, into the Capital Projects Fund with the first budget amendment this year. And so a lot of the design work has already been appropriated and budgeted to keep going on those projects. And those projects don't need supplemental appropriations at this time. So, and working with staff as we have already in various departments in engineering and parks and facilities, we can continue and finish Fire Station 7, and we can continue working on the design of many of these projects with the funding allocations they have, and then sit down with you and also get our sales tax figures in and see exactly what is prudent to continue budgeting and moving forward with into fiscal 21. In the Sanitation Environmental Services Fund, there's $150,000 for the air curtain burner. This was a purchase that was originally approved in fiscal 19. We thought it would come in before June 30. It actually came in much later in fiscal 20, and we simply need to reappropriate it in the fiscal 20 budget because it is here and getting ready to get fired up. In the Hotel Motel Tax Fund, we have roughly $104,000 for 3 projects: downtown bench replacement. Additional money is necessary to cover the actual paving costs of the Eastern Flank Battlefield resurfacing project, and then design work for the Harlansdale Main Barn. In the Parkland Dedication Fund, we have an additional $75,000 to continue work on the Greenway for Aspen Grove to Mac Hatcher. This is a project which over half of it comes from outside agencies and grants. So we wanted to make sure to continue work on that. In the Community Development Block Grant Fund, there's a true up. We fund the CDBG budget every year at a conservative level to begin because we don't know what our federal funding allocation will be. We received that letter in late fall. We budgeted $250,000. The actual amount was for $318,000. So this increase of $68,000 allows us to recognize that revenue and the expense and make sure that we can continue supporting and getting that money out the door to needy individuals and entities within Franklin. And then finally, you see there an additional $197,000 for the Multipurpose Capital Projects Fund. That are simply all of the transfers that I mentioned in the general fund, hotel, motel, and parkland dedication being transferred into that fund because that's where the expenses are recorded. Finally, there are Amendment 2 is year-end contingencies. These total $1.25 million. These should be more familiar to you. These are also written very clearly as amounts not to exceed. The first is $1 million for the Franklin Transit Authority and the Transit Fund. This is simply a timing issue of when they can get federal reimbursement for their operating grants. If they can't get it in within the 60-day accrual window, then this money is there in order to make sure that they end in a proper fund balance and we meet our state obligations. Should be noted that last year we did the exact same thing. We increased the allocation by $1 million, and it turns out we didn't need any of this. So we are hopeful, again, that that will be the case this year. And then finally, due to the decline in economy, there's an anticipation that we may not quite get the full amount of gasoline taxes that we anticipated in the street aid fund. So we are recommending an amount not to exceed $250,000 to still meet necessary state guidelines for cash and fund balances in the street aid fund and cover any potential loss of gas tax revenues from the state. The financial impact, as you can see on your screen, 5 of the 8 funds that are affected have no change. There will be a decrease of fund balance in sanitation, hotel, motel, and parkland dedication of the amounts shown on the screen. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you or the committee may have.
Any questions from the committee? Then I'm going to ask for a motion to forward this to the full board. That is consideration of ordinance number 2020-13. And we will then check to see if there's any comments from the public. Do we have a motion to forward this item to the full board?
So moved.
Proper motion, is there a second?
Second.
Proper second. Is there comments from the general public?
Any comments on the line regarding the fiscal 20 budget amendments?
Any comments from anyone in the audience? Any comments from any alderman who have tuned in to this committee meeting?
I have a comment.
Okay, Alderman Martin, thought maybe you might.
I just want to compliment Michael and Eric on these presentations. They're not an easy thing to do, and I really appreciate what they've done, and they've made it clear, and I hope nobody asks me to explain it. I'll just refer them to the Anyway, you've done a great job, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. We're here for you.
Let me get my mic on. We have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call voice vote. Alderman Bradford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go then to let's go to item 10, monthly finance report from May 2020. Mike Lowe, you're up. And we will give you and Michael time to swap out.
unmute now? Cool. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start over. I would like to briefly go through the monthly reports executive summary. I may go through each schedule. From Schedule 1, we have received the February local sales tax. It was almost equivalent to last February's. Year to date through this point, we're up 2.9%, and that's through February. We do not have March's number, but we have seen the state, and they're down by 6%, and it's not great results, but it could have been worse as the state was essentially shut down by the last week of the month. From Schedules 2 through 5, development fees have continued to come in, and for March are actually higher than last year. From Schedule 6, gasoline taxes are known through February, and they were actually higher than last February by 12%. For Schedule 7, which is the conference center, the loss for March was less than last year's loss for the same month. And as we await April's number, there are fixed costs that are incurred by the conference center, even when the conference center is closed. From Schedule 8, which is the grant schedule, as Michael mentioned with the budget amendments, we are watching transit grant receipts because as of the end of February, there's only been 32% of their grant receipts that have come in. So we're going to keep tracking those. And last year, they got a lot of grant receipts right near the end of the fiscal year. And let me finish with Schedule 9. And that actually, as you look at fund balances through February, and the general fund deficit is about 1.5 million at this point. We know we're estimating possibly up to 5 million for this year. And this deficit is actually less than what we saw at the end of January. And that's because we're starting to see where we get the bulk of business taxes come in. And because there's actually been a postponement of the due date, we actually have only received about a third of the business taxes we would have received by now. So actually, we haven't really seen the full amounts start coming in. And next month, I would like to let the committee know that we'll have a actual quarterly report to provide. So we'll actually see how we are after we see the results from March. Christine, did you have anything you might want to add?
If Mr. Chairman's agreeable, I might add a couple comments to the conference center. Our comptroller, Mike Lowe, reported the loss for the month that's reported in this report. Certainly, the conference center was actually having an excellent year until this emergency occurred, which they have, while they essentially lost pretty much all of the revenue, they have reduced expenses as much as they possibly can in that facility in a lot of ways. So we do at the end of March have equity for the year. We were good to the year of $220,000. That's what's included in Schedule 7 at the back of this report. I would expect that we will see much of that be erased in those minimal operating expenses throughout the rest of this fiscal year. We are in communication regularly with the management of the conference center, the management of the hotel, and they do have staff who are working with these bookings, and most of them are accepting later dates. They do want to come back to Franklin, but they are doing, the staff that's there is doing their best to keep them as business for us in the future, whether that be later on in 2020 or even into 2021. So that's what we have encouraged them to do is keep that business with us, even if it takes some time for them to come back. So that's what is going on at the conference center.
committee members, you've heard the monthly finance report. Do any of you all have any specific questions? I do have one or two.
I've got just one related to the conference center. Do we know, obviously Chartwell has some fixed expenses and payroll costs. Are they eligible to get into PPP loans from the government to maybe offset some of those expenses that maybe we're incurring as a government entity?
I haven't asked them that specific question. They have furloughed a great number of employees. They did that quite a bit. They did that early on, and they just have a handful of people, a very small number of people still left. And also because of the nature of that building and the hotel, if you recall, most of the mechanical systems are shared between the hotel and the conference center, such as the chiller, all those mechanical systems. So the few positions that are left are split between. We're not incurring 100% of remaining maintenance person because they work in the whole center. So they perhaps could be eligible for some federal assistance, but we've been keeping in contact with them that what they do have left is pretty minimal, and they are shared expenses between the hotel, which is a Chartwell property, and our conference center, which is Chartwell managed.
We certainly can make an inquiry about their use of that program. I would think they're eligible, but as Christine said, they did a lot of reductions in staff because of the change in people not traveling. So let's see what we can find out on that. We'll share that with you.
Christine, go to Schedule 6, and let's just let me, or Mike, either one. Let me just ask. We did a $230,000 budget against last year's revenue of 177,000, right? Am I looking at that correctly? Yeah. I was wondering, we did up that considerably.
Well,
we are up for the year, but we did miss that revenue projection.
And our budget is we take the annual and divide it by 12. You'll notice that $230,000 a month is not necessarily correlated to the seasonality of the gas tax. And there is a seasonality. Typically, of course, it picks up in warmer months when people are out traveling. May and June were last year were big months for us. Certainly, the winter time, if there's any bad weather, people don't even drive much at all. So it is, if you want to compare, the budget looks like a straight line, but there is seasonality in actual gas tax receipts.
Eric, and this is not something, we'll put you on the spot just a little bit. We know we've got the pilgrimage canceled. We know we've canceled the rodeo. We know we've canceled the fair. We know that we probably have a delay on Main Street Festival, but I'm assuming that's still on track. I'm just looking at the 4 or 5 big events that draw the crowds here, and the sales tax revenue and all the hotel motel accommodations that we do, because we have canceled we haven't. The events have been canceled that would fill up those hotel motel and do the spikes possibly in sales tax revenue. Any other cancellations that you know of or anything? I've only covered the 4 or 5 that I can remember, but those would be significant possible events where there's a major number of people coming into Franklin and Williamson County.
Well, I think as a general rule, we're uncertain about large-scale festivals anytime soon. Just don't know. So that's not just Main Street Festival have been rescheduled to July. That's uncertain. can't speak to what we might see in terms of the fall with Pumpkin Fest or even Dickens, what those might look like. We just don't know. Right now, the state is very clear about no large scale community gatherings. Festivals are specifically identified as being prohibited at this time. So, and we've not gotten any sense of when that might specifically let up. So again, it's like a lot of these things. We don't know. We know the impact's big. We don't know it, and that's why we cut revenue by more than half across the board when you look at hotel motel in particular. And as we referenced, we might need to reduce it further when we get closer to fall and have a little better idea, or we might get a sense of things coming back. Now, the Convention and Visitors Bureau has a sense that once things open back up more, that we actually might reap some benefit because we're a very easily driven to market for a lot of the country. And we also are a less densely populated area compared to larger cities. That those might be the very most popular places and the places that rebound the soonest because people will feel safest being there. So those are kind of speculation, but that it does have some logic to it. And it all depends on when people are comfortable getting back into traveling for the weekend business. And that's a big part of what drives these dollars. But business travelers are a significant chunk of this too. And until those are more, that starts up again too, you'll see that affecting what we see in hotel motel as well. So again, it's kind of a mystery. We've made pretty significant cuts, but we'll keep an eye on what it looks like coming forward in terms of revenue projections.
Thank you. And if it's appropriate, we'll ask one more time. Any other comments or calls or anything? And if not,
any public comment on the line for the monthly financial reports?
Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. I know that Scott may not want to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right. Let's do a roll call. Do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Bransford, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We are adjourned.